13 Soccersperience copyright. The final of the 2239 Soccersperience copyright Euro-Earth region trademark final achieved the aim of its creators in the form of an impeccably perfect 00 NAC, net approachment configuration. The sport had come a long way since those early muddy dalliances with sewn pig's bladders to the now unrecognizable epitome of perfect fitness, control, and skill that the 23rd century's players show day in day out, injury-free, well only for the time it takes remold a ligament or repair a femur, but injuries of that nature are almost like a glitch in the matrix now, as the perfectly rated attacker will move forward with the ball to be intercepted with a perfectly timed challenge by his counterpart, meaning that actual physical contact between the two players is technically impossible. It is from there the desire to reach the perfect no-score draw arose. What was seen in those heathen early days as the antithesis of entertainment is what now everyone involved in the game strides towards. The perfect match of abilities to cancel out attack and defense into a choreographed blend of sporting achievement. Historians of the sport would find very few similarities between the modern game and its former guise. Transfers no longer exist, a player can be honed to perfection through the use of technology, thus making it possible for them to have a rating of 99 in all of the so-called 7 disciplines that define the score value of a player. The winners of the last 3 editions of the trophy Euro-Latin South Ethnicity 3 United had enjoyed a 99 rating throughout its squad for a number of years, thereby making it impossible for any opponent to tie with them. Obviously, they could not be beaten as nothing is better than 99, but the appearance of the recently upgraded Euro North Teutonic unmarked ethnicity meant that finally the long-dreamt of stalemate could be achieved. Life in the 23rd century followed this pattern in all of its most important aspects. You may think, with good reason, that if players could be genetically engineered then eventually all teams will be 99 rated and all matches perfect draws. Unfortunately, it is somewhat more difficult than that in reality. A player must have one attribute of over 80 to begin with so that the process can be initiated. By means of an example, if you take historical reference dominator #37, a certain Mr. C. Ronaldo, who was extremely popular in the game's phase period standard development 3 era, his aerobic thrust rating at the peak of his career would only have been 77, not to mention his frighteningly poor pivot swivel circumferencer, which would be in the mid-40s. Ronaldo would not have got as far as the training pitch, nobody with those stats would. Of course, nobody with those stats would go anywhere near it. One of the most delightful things about life in the 23rd century is that people know their place. With the impossibility of using goals scored as a means of deciding who wins the coveted trophy, the only tool that the boffins had failed to find a way to control came into use. Each player's capacity to generate advertising revenue during the match gave the teams a total score that could be used a calculation based on which the winner would be decided. The generation of this income was the fulcrum of all that was deemed good and decent in the future. As knowledge was no longer a commodity that needed to be attained, everyone could technically know everything thanks to improvements in brain storage capacity and the S928 model chips automatically inserted into embryos during gestation. This meant that every human being could instantly translate any of the languages admitted by the world's governing body, the Council of Human Expansion. Every child could perform any mathematical operation, speak, care for itself, cook, and, most importantly, generate advertising revenue from day one. Of course, as you will be unaccustomed to the workings of everyday society in the future, maybe some background will help you to understand the plight of the 23rd century mother. Pregnancy as you know it was done away with, such a barbaric practice, towards the middle of the 22nd century, when finally, the entire gestation process could be completed without the need to inhabit an itinerant frame. From this moment on, the process became pain-free, and, soon after, sex-free. Infertility disappeared, as did every ailment that could end lives in the fragile period of the early 21st. Medicine advanced at an alarming rate, diseases were eradicated, though the real progress came in 2109 when the use of 4D printers allowed for the creation of temporary organs to be introduced into a human with an ailment, allowing for their affected region to be regenerated, later reprogrammed, even later upgraded. All of the foregoing on the proviso that your advertising revenue allowed for the treatment. And therein lies the rub. Oh, yes, it sounds idyllic, almost too good to be true. And for the 61 million people proudly holding Earth pertainment status, life was none too shabby. Of course, those at the bottom of that list were always looking over the shoulders, should someone sneak up on them at the end of the revenue fiscal actualization period. There were a lot of sleepless nights for those between 59 and 61 million. As you moved up the revenue scale, your ID card's number would be automatically updated to show your status as an Earth citizens. The elite had a 0 before their first number, after that, 10 down to 61. As early as 2257, at the Grand Consortium of Future Enlightenment, the actual benefits of having more than this number of inhabitants on the planet was discussed. Of course, wisely, the decision to have a selection of suitably neutered adult humans with no capacity to raise advertising money was deemed mandatory, at least until robotics became sufficiently adept to provide what was proudly unveiled as the non-threatening replicate human labor enhancer at the Paris Trade Fair of 2189. With the introduction of these devices, rogue human workers could then be dispatched to the Mars moons and Zone 3 lunar defense stations to aid with work on the shield that will protect the planet from future invasions. The first invasion was repelled by chance on New Year's Eve 2199, as space powder resulting from workers mining excavation on the Mars moons prevented the alien craft from entering the recently enhanced Stratosphere 2.0. The Earth's inhabitants knew that there were forces out there, but were convinced that the dust shield was their best form of protection. This was the reason that Mars moons were cloned with more and more minds so that the remainder of the human population, if you can call them that, worthless individuals who can barely raise a minor trending phenomenon between them, are sent to ensure that those remaining on the blue planet, have a delightful existence. War and conflict were also things of the past. The population of the Earth had everything it wanted, and what it did not have, it could create. There was no need for currency, trade, industry, finance, etc., everything was done for you by your trusty 4D printer. You could change your living space completely in the time it took to download the new house. All living areas on the planet, condensed into the region you would know as Europe before Brexit, were suitably habituated in order to create any living experience desired. People simply engaged in their projects, their means to increasing their trendography profiles and status rank of the famed and feared Papu Index registered trademark. The only purpose in life was to be as utterly marvelous as you could muster, and if that wasn't enough, you could upgrade your lacking parts or have new ones installed. To get to this situation, a decision had to be made on who could stay, and who had to go. Obviously, in a world in which everyone is a potential genius and in any case robots can perform operations and engineering tasks much more efficiently than humans, academia was destined to disappear. The last university on Earth, out of respect, Bologna, was successfully turned into an indoor water complex with every species of bird known to humanity. A person had to have a rating of over 80 in 2 of the 7 essential life factors. Survivors were then broken down into further subcategories for their professions which would contain a further 7 specialization factors. These 7 factors were, all weighted the same. 1. Attractiveness, secretly given extra weighting for ties. 2. Sex appeal. 3. Vivacity. 4. Inalterability scale rating. 5. Determination. 6. Lack of mindfulness. 7. Apathy repulsion dichotomy. Sir, nobody actually had any idea what the 7th one meant, but it was often used as a wild card should something be required urgently. Anybody who scored over 80 on 2 of these aspects could remain as a resident of Earth and begin work on their personal upgrade program so that they could first obtain an average of 80 for all 7 aspects, and then move towards the magic 99. If we take as an example the world of entertainment, These factors combine to make the perfect music. Objet d'art, or cinema, theater and literature were deemed pointless in the early 22nd century as everyone knew everything anyway. Obviously, if a song had a 99 rating in its 7 essential categories, that perfect piece would be listed as oral humanity heritage, and be played on loop for eternity. Perfect movies were deemed to be those that caused no alterations to the 7 essential life factors, and their perfection was displayed by bearing the certification visual humanity heritage. Again, for the purposes of comparison, a whiter shade of pale would score 32 on the X scale, and Citizen Kane would not even be eligible for rating due to its flagrant breach of 7EC copyright. I think that goes some way to showing just how far we have progressed as a society from the dark ages of Ed Sheeran. Leisure played a big part in everyday life. Urban conglomerations were created to house up to 100,000 people maximum, though the space was divided in line with the wishes of the resident. Some wanted secluded farmhouses, others city palaces, others even craved urban sprawl. The major historical hubs of the ancient past were recreated to their former glory, the European ones like Rome and Athens actually in situ, though others, such as the Stockholm Taj Mahal, the Turin Pyramids or Everest in Bradford, were purpose-built for the experience. These touristic playgrounds were staffed by conveniently sterilized drone workers and robots, dressed in period costume to create a lifelike vision of history. The French Revolution brunch was certainly a treat not to be missed. What a time to be alive, providing you were, as they say, alive. And as a wise man once said, you're only alive if you have a life. On the Mars moons, the story was quite different. That said, on the Mars moons it was notably better than on Mars itself, and that was a world away, every pun intended, to the poor souls forced to galaxy transit due to a zero productivity coefficient. There was little contact between the Mars moon inhabitants and those on Earth. The inhabitants of the latter only cared about the creation of the space dust that would form the shield. The moon dwellers had all been treated with a lung destabilizer that meant that if they ever came into contact with the Earth's atmosphere, they would choke to death. They were also sterilized. The management teams of the Mars moons were formed by those who had fallen below the 61 million mark. The incentive was there for them to believe they could return. There was talk that some had, but you've seen The Running Man, haven't you? They ruled with an iron fist, living in fear of not reaching their space dust targets and being forced to work in the mines themselves. There was also a secret council that operated from Earth to ensure that everything went swimmingly, and to implement the hopeful idea that this would be the last group of pure humans to work on the moons, as Moon 7.23 and 8.15 were now being completely handled by robots. The remaining human residents on these were treated to a fatal dose of oxygen and nitrogen and suffocated on the spot. Their corpses were then passed on to the galaxy transitors, who traded them for parts or simply disposed of them in remote outer colonies. Back on Earth, the desire to no longer unnecessarily perpetuate the human race was becoming less of an issue as life expectancy stood at poor, practically eternal rating. Death had not been eliminated, though in many cases, it was not always as so overwhelmingly fatal as it had been in the past. Of course, if you drove your vehicle off a cliff, that there was nothing that could be done, but if you had a fall and banged your head, whilst you were in the coma, all necessary items would be replaced by robots, again providing your scores could handle the transaction, and in the meantime, you enjoyed lifelike virtual reality trips to the pre-health excellence history period, from the Neolithic up to 2038, handpicked by your bond group. Bond groups were what came to replace families. With the disappearance of the need to procreate physically and the feeling that children were little more than a hindrance occupying one of the vital numbers, when a person died, they had to be replaced with elements of their own DNA, yet this was a lengthy process, and despite the fact that the children had all the necessary hardware to continue the life of the deceased, they often failed to utilize any of the chances given to them, thus being able to bypass the entire childhood and adolescence period was a great step forward. The ultimate idea would be for the unfortunately dead person to be replaced by a clone who was exactly the same in every way, thus truly perpetuating life, although this technology was still a long way away. Bond groups were much more efficient than families, as you could program your reaction to the members within your group to your needs at that time. If you needed sympathy, that's how they came across. If you needed space, they suddenly disappeared. They laughed at your jokes and gave you constant high ratings to boost your advertising score. There were no fights, as you controlled their responses, and they controlled yours. You might feel you were telling someone to jump off a bridge, but if they had you set to charming, they would probably hear something like, "You really have style." Plus. Mars Moon 2.87 Mining Date 314 Development Phase 3. The problem with this continued use of humans is their need to rest. This has a serious effect on production. Automated Mars moons are leaving us in their tracks. The head of mining addressed the board. If we do away with people totally, they will see on Earth that robots can be used for everything. We are still human, remember. His deputy replied. Come on, we are in the 62 to 74 million bracket. Middle management are practically untouchable. Why would they replace us with robots to do the same job? The look on his face showed that he had answered his own question. Nobody was indispensable. Well, just imagine that one day the top 40 decide that there really isn't enough space for 61 million people plus drones and robots on the Earth. Remember, they are using the maps of the 14th century basically due to the need for concrete encasement of the North America, Russian and Asian areas following World War III, March 7, 2019, 12:47 GMT to March 7, 2019, 19:02 GMT. Those areas are uninhabitable, and, although the best parts have been recreated, remember the Norwegian Serengeti? All it takes is for the elite to want rid, and then where will we be? Imagine being a 68 million, then, you'd go from 7 million away from freedom, to 27 million. It would be a death sentence. We have to make them see the moral worth of humans. He concluded. How do we do that? And what exactly is their moral worth? Our moral worth, you mean? That, too. Fucking good question. Mars Moon 2.87 Sector 326B Rest Phase 2. Jake loved wandering around the antique stores during rest phase. Bits of information trickled to the moon dwellers of incredible progress made in the sphere of medical science that might one day improve their conditions, or even better, mean a return to Earth. On the journey to the moons from Earth, the new workers were fitted with a chip that gave them all the information they needed on their former planet and how radiation meant it was still too dangerous to return. Once the shield was completed, it would absorb the radiation from the Earth and regenerate the planet. Workers eagerly paid into pension funds to set aside their farmsteads in Africa and Asia once repopulation could commence. This money never went into any fund and was simply used to pay management's wages and transport costs. As a wise manager once said, a human without a dream is an unproductive one. Jake turned the corner and found himself faced with early 21st century artifacts. He'd never seen anything like this. This was a real find. He took it to the counter and asked the owner, Hugo. What's this, man? It looks so primitive. Buttons. This is so retro, Jake laughed. Välkommen till min butik, kommer jag controller att information för dig, Hugo replied. Ah, sorry, I forgot, you are still set to Swedish from your last customer. Hang on. Jake entered his thumbprint on the desk control and Hugo then recognized his client in the latter's native language. Welcome to my store, I will check that information for you. Hugo accessed the inventory window and located the item number. He began to read. It's called an iPad, very popular from 2010 onwards until they were discontinued in favor of visual ocular projection technology in the 2030s. From what I can gather, it is a kind of primitive leisure hub. This one has a capacity of 16 gigabytes. What's a gigabyte? Jake inquired. It is a primitive form of storage space. In those days, you had an amount of space on your device that could be used for music, photos, videos, etc. Once that space was used up, you had to delete things. Why couldn't they transfer data to a bone hub like we do? Bones are much better for storing data than any other support. That wasn't discovered until much later. You could buy more expensive models with extra space, but even these were limited. Anyway, I'm not a history teacher, do you want it or not? Another customer had entered who looked more likely to buy something decent. How much? Jake asked. 100 credits. Oh, and you'll need this. He gave him a white cable with 2 pins at one end and a sort of, well, he couldn't even describe it, at the other end. What am I supposed to do with this? You'll need it to charge the battery. Find an old landing dock and look for a hole in the wall. They were still in use up until the end of the last century in Sector 4. You might get lucky. Now do one, I have a business to run. Hugo smiled at the new customer as he placed his digit on the counter. Hugo asked the customer. Jake left the store and made his way to Sector 4. He didn't know what he was looking for, so decided to ask. Know what I can do with this? He asked a burly worker. Apart from shove it up your arse, I imagine you'd be looking for a power socket. What are you? One of these retro Pokemon weirdos. It's 50 credits for an hour. Charge it for an hour, you should get about 12 hours use out of it. Follow me. Jake activated the payment with the bank chip in this right thumbnail and followed the guy. He had no idea why he was trying to access this archaic machine, but something told him to do it. The guy left him, and in about 6 minutes it had enough battery to switch on. It asked him for a 4-digit unlock key. Child's play, the thought as he connected his Porto algorithmer. Once inside, he remembered the history classes from school, especially IT history, where he saw the faces of idiots standing proudly next to a machine the size of a house. He began opening the apps, very basic forms of modern communication. Message from boss. Doctor's appointment. Son's birthday. The iPad was last accessed on the 21st of February 2017, a video recording of some sort of a Soccersperience copyright match, but it was a match like he had never seen before. This was not the new incarnation of the sport, moreover peak period football even before the soccer rebrand of 2102. The names of the teams meant nothing to him. He found them listed in his history insert that they corresponded to villages in the United Kingdom, now deemed unnecessary for continuance as part of the Euroclassification programmer of worthwhile residences. Only 7 dwelling areas were maintained in the United Kingdom, the home of Jake's forefathers, all chosen for their ability to provide ideal living environment grades 4 to 7. London and York were used as tourist centres, but the rest was used for drone and robot maintenance and residence, except for the aforementioned specialist leisure recreation elements, such as Everest and the Ribble Valley Atlas Mountains. He watched the video in awe. Rochdale against Port Vale. There was no information on player ratings, nor on the amount of advertising revenue that they could generate. His insert told him the population of the Earth at the time was over 6 billion. That must have been one cramped planet, he said aloud. The first 10 seconds of the video were enthralling. From a free kick near the corner flag, the ball was floated into the box, the keeper came for it, flapped, knocked the ball onto one of his own players for it to be then scrambled in by an attacker. No rating cancellation, no perfect attainment, just a series of mistakes and profit. The second goal defied all belief. Jake had to know the ratings of these players. How could they have been allowed to perform in public like that? The attacker was one-on-one with the keeper and yet still managed to hit the post before bundling it in off the bottom of a diving defender. Were these people truly professional footballers? It was laughable, yet adorable. How the crowd enjoyed the game, he had never seen anything like it. Port Vale went 1-2 up, then Rochdale pulled it back to 3-2. The goalkeepers seemed to have holes in their bodies. At the death, Vale salvaged a draw with some more awful defending. It was an epiphany. He watched video after video until the hour was up and then took it away to watch more. He knew what his calling was. To resurrect football. He got together a group of sporty and eager humans and showed them the videos. He had now upstructured the entire content of the app. He had found YouTube for his training purposes. Aside from the football, there was also retro music that, whilst not banned, had simply been deemed unnecessary with regard to attained perfection, and therefore overlooked. As they watched more videos, taking inspiration from Tranmere Rovers in the 1990s, they formed their own team, taking the name Everton Mars Moon 2.87 FC, but this was simply left as Everton as the rest was considered a mouthful. They completed their first training session with Ned's atomic dustbin at full blast, effortlessly recreating the imperfections of true humans. In the space of 3 years, Jake's project had expanded to the entire moon, which, quite surprisingly, had the exact same surface area and shape as England. With the aid of computer assistance, the map was recreated to produce 20 teams that represented the teams playing in the Premier League in the year the iPad was last used. Playing football became a means of identity for Moon residents, whose lives had been slowly eaten away, and had nothing to call their own. The spirit of resistance and defiance was frowned upon by the authorities, but these did not overly show much concern as the plan to reduce the Moon's breathable atmosphere was underway. Soon humans would no longer be needed for moon work and would all suffocate in space, except for those who had been fitted with the Respira Upgrade 4.2, who would continue to breathe normally. Despite the reduction of air quality, the league continued to make progress and matches were attended by nearly 2,000 people at makeshift stadia throughout the moon. A full calendar was drawn up with 38 league games played on a home and away basis. Jake was the captain of Everton and used his friends and colleagues to put a fairly decent team together. That said, they faced fierce competition from the southern moon zone, particularly Chelsea, and, to start with, Arsenal, but the latter soon took the Rochdale vs Port Vale videos too literally and fell away. Everton's traditional rival too put on a strong show when a former German ballet dancer was appointed their manager. Rivalries soon came to the fore as the little more than 40 miles separating the teams in fictitious Merseyside and invented Greater Manchester. Unfortunately, on more than one occasion, this light-hearted banter spilled over into actual fisticuffs, especially when the 8 faithful upholders of Manchester City's colours were attacked by Sunderland radicals. Illness and misery were rife like never before on the moon, but the league managed to detract people's attention away from this. The bars were full of talk, matches were analyzed and the striving for imperfection took on an almost supernatural calling. Football in this form meant something to the people, it signified them using their bodies to achieve something, or to fail in the process. As the season drew to a close, 4 teams could still win the league on the last day, and 2 of the last relegation places were still undecided. Unfortunately, Sunderland had been relegated at Christmas after a run of 22 losses and points deductions for ruining the retro concert music scheme, notably causing an Echo and the Bunnymen tribute act to cancel. Nobody wanted to miss the final day. The standings were thus: Everton 82 points, Manchester United 81 points, Liverpool 80 points, Chelsea 80 points. Air quality had caused 2 of the last set of games to be reduced to 80 minutes, but the organisers were determined to get to the end of the season. Everton knew that if they won, they would be champions. Man United could afford to draw if Everton lost, as they had a better goal difference. If Liverpool or Chelsea won, then there would be complications. Everton could draw if Man United didn't win and Chelsea won, but if they drew and Liverpool won, their city rivals would be champions on goal difference. The matches began as old people could barely stand, wheezing as the atmosphere took a turn for the worse. Both United and Liverpool took the lead early, but Everton, playing Middlesbrough who needed to win, were 0-3 down at half-time. In the second half, the first of the casualties in the crowds were confirmed, as were deaths in the dwelling areas. That said, on the bright side, Everton got 2 back and Liverpool had a penalty against them. At 2-3 Everton still needed 2 goals to ensure the title when a stroke of fortune meant Jake's shot was deflected off the hapless defender. 3-3 was not enough as Liverpool scored again. United went 2-1 up to put them in pole position. Once again Liverpool failed at the last as their goalkeeper scored an own goal following a routine thrown in. Then in the last minute of the season, and with all of the crowd beginning to wane, even two Everton players lay dying on the sidelines, Jake took the ball around three defenders and placed it in the top corner to crown Everton as champions as the last of the air was pointlessly inhaled. Jake collapsed in the goal mouth, fighting to get some oxygen inside him, and saw the cheers of the jubilant remaining fans interspersed with handshakes and appreciation on the part of opposing fans. As the life slipped out of him, everyone else and most of the moon, he knew it had been worth it.